Welcome to the Light Gate. Good Monday to you all. We are coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in the state of Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We are on Roku, we are on Facebook, we are on YouTube, and I think we're now on Preston?
Rumble.
Thank you.
I'm not sure it's working, but I'm hoping it is.
Okay. So we got a great guest tonight. He's returning to us, and this is one of my favorite guests, just so you know. It's intellectual, it's interesting, and oh my goodness, we got a lot to talk about. So go for it, Preston. To you.
Thank you, Dolly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on, I think this is episode 73 of The Light Gate. And yeah, we're now on Rumble as well. If it's working, I am not sure it is, but I'm fingers crossed. Find out after the show. At any rate, I'm, of course, I'm Preston Dennett, your host, and my lovely co-host is Dolly Safran. She's the subject of my book, Symmetry, and we're hard at work on Symmetry 2. We just got a working title, which we're keeping under wraps for now, but I love it. It's a very intriguing title, and I don't think it's ever been used before, which is in itself amazing, considering there's, gosh, I don't know, 1 million books on Amazon, 2 million, 10 million. At any rate, yeah, very excited about our guest tonight. He's a repeat guest, repeat offender on our show, but always very popular, incredibly knowledgeable, lots of fun, and we'll get right to him. But let me take a quick hello to all of you guys, because it's because of you we do this show. It's because of you that our Mondays are that much brighter and more interesting. So thank you guys. And who do we have here? We have Ruth Kleiber. Good evening. And we have Teresa Levine and Michael Kennedy, who says our guest has been an awesome prior guest. I'm excited for this episode.
Absolutely. Thank you.
He also says congratulations. Thanks, Michael. Love you so much.
Thank
You're awesome.
Hugs to Kylie.
Who else we got here? Owlman, happy Monday, best time. Yes, it's my favorite part of Monday. I'm glad we're on an hour earlier. It makes it just a little bit easier for us here on the East Coast. And I hope people can get home in time on the West Coast. Okay, we have Sunny Burnett and namaste with your endless generosity and goodwill and kindness, and just all around amazingness. Thank you, namaste. We love you dearly. Couldn't do this show without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Louise, hello from New Jersey, fellow Earthlings and all others. Yes, don't forget to include the others, because I'm sure there are some out there. Oh, Sunny, this is so kind of you. I learned so much from Dolly and you. Very cool.
Thank you.
Get your questions in early, guys, because we always love fielding questions from chat, and our guest tonight has the ability to answer all kinds of questions. Thank you, Louise. You're awesome. Catherine Fourfeathers, and Jamie Mashburn. And who else do we got here? We have Scarlet Fire. Woe unto them that call evil and good evil. Oh, wow. That's an intense quote. Thank you, Scarlet Fire.
Wow.
Oh, and it goes on from Father Dwight Longnecker. That's pretty interesting.
I think I know that person, or I've heard of him. In other words, I've seen something about him. How about that? Okay.
Wow. Okay, we have Bambi Dudley. Good evening from Philly. And we have Judy Wilhelm, and we have all kinds of people. Susan Lawrence and Jim and the dependable Real Badger. Hi, Real Badger. Always awesome to see you here. Becky. Becky says, I've looked forward to this all day. Big smiley face.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's awesome. Hello, Kaj. And gosh, we've got a nice crowd here today. We have Amy Thompson. We have Olivia. Love and light.
Thank you.
That.
As well to you.
Becky Duncan, just got your book today. Can't wait to read it. Oh, awesome.
Cool.
It really got me curious which one. But I hope you enjoy it either way. And do let me know. I would love to hear what you think of it. CT Guitar Guy, I hope you're both well. Yeah, all things considered, there's always something going wrong, but more stuff going right. So that's life on Earth for you. Halogen Oven TV.
Hello.
And we have Carl Mids all the way from morning in England. Yep, it is.
Hello.
Thanks for staying up so late. And Karen Holton. I just
Hi,
did a
Karen.
show with her on her podcast, Angels and Aliens, which was so. Oh, cat is walking across my keyboard. That was close. Almost pressed the wrong button. Scared the living daylights out of me. Hi, Karen. It was so much fun doing your podcast, Angels and Aliens. Guys, check it out. She's got all kinds of amazing guests and shows.
Absolutely.
I got to talk about my science fiction stories, which I almost never get to talk about. So thank you, Karen. Okay. Relly Assistio, more power. Very cool.
Yeah.
And we have Roger Murray giving a shout out to Dr. John Mack. Very sad. Yes, he passed away. Okay, I've got to get started here. I've at my limit of
Hi, Peak.
5 minutes, but Peak is here. We have Ross Davies. We have Carl Mids. I'm putting up this question with a little star so we can get back to it. We have Elliot Green, top channel, Preston. Thank you. And Kelly, and we have C and Star Orchid, and all kinds of people joining us tonight.
Yes.
You guys are awesome. Pretty much have to get going now. So Peace Pipe and Walking Trees and
Wow.
Star Orchid giving us a nice super chat. You are awesome.
Thank you very much.
And I seriously am about to get in trouble. So I will get going with our guest tonight, who I am so excited to have back on the show. He's amazing. He, of course, is Joshua Cutchin. And let me just tell you a little bit about him for those of you who haven't had the wonderful opportunity to see our previous episodes with him or read his amazing books or seen him on other podcasts and TV shows, because he's been around. He has appeared on many paranormal programs, including Coast to Coast, History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Has at last count 7 critically acclaimed books, including A Trojan Feast, Food and Drink Offerings of Aliens, Faeries, and Sasquatch, which, by the way, is in Spanish as well. This is what really caught my attention and how I got to start following his work. He's also got The Brimstone Deceit, an in-depth examination of supernatural sense, otherworldly odors, and monstrous miasmas. I love his work. It's so specific and so in-depth. Who else do we have? Thieves in the Night, a brief history of supernatural child abductions. Apparently it's not just ETs taking people, fairies as well. Where the Footprints End, High Strangeness and the Bigfoot Phenomena, Volumes 1 and 2. He also contributed to the book Wood Knocks, Volume 3, Journal of Sasquatch Research, which is what sort of led to that series of books. And in 2022, very recently, he released his 2-part masterwork. Hoping to talk about this tonight, Ecology of Souls, a new mythology of death and the paranormal. Death is such a taboo subject for so many people. Don't know why. We all do it. At some point, it's going to happen to every darn one of us. We're here on Earth for a short time, and Joshua dives deep into this subject. So that's very interesting. He's written all kinds of stuff. A fictional novel, Them Old Ways Never Died. A curated collection of essays, fairy films, We Folk on the Big Screen.
I love that.
He's spoken at all kinds of conferences, MUFON events, Fortean organizations, X-Files United Conference, Con Carolinas, Strange Reality Conferences. I could go on, but let's just get into bring him on. I just want to say also he's an award-winning musician, which I think is awesome. Okay, let's just bring you on, Joshua, before I embarrass you any further.
I know. Hi. Yeah, I'm always like, oh, do I have to sit through this?
Yes, you do. That is the price you pay for being so accomplished.
Fair enough. Well, it's a pleasure to be here again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's awesome to have you back again. Like I said, your shows have always been really popular. We've got so much to discuss. So not many people who embrace all the aspects of the UFOs and some are nuts and bolts folks, you know, they just don't want to hear about little fairies running around or all the commonalities.
Yeah, you know, when you really drill down to it, I have some very strong suspicions, but as far as what I believe when it comes to all this stuff, it's just that something is happening. So that's sort of I would like to think that that allows me to look at some things that I normally wouldn't look at.
Yeah, well, that's one of the awesome things about you as a researcher is you are objective. You're not saying this is the way, period. And because once you do that, you box yourself in, and any data that doesn't fit your quote theory is rejected.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's been really interesting. I've noticed that in some pretty dramatic ways. I mean, a good example, not to take the reins too quickly of this conversation, but a classic example that I like to use is the Ape Canyon event. Are you all familiar with that?
I am. That's an old time Bigfoot encounter where they were quite violent, right? Is that right?
It's a really popular. It's an often cited Bigfoot encounter where Fred Beck and several others who were part of a prospecting camp near Mount St. Helens shot at a Bigfoot, and supposedly their cabin was assaulted throughout the entire night by Bigfoot throwing rocks and reaching through the cabin and all sorts of things. A very harrowing encounter. But if you go to the primary source, and there's really only one primary source for the Ape Canyon encounter, which is Fred Beck's pamphlet. I Fought the Ape Men of Mount St. Helens. I believe that's the title of it. Fred Beck was a weird guy. And there's all this stuff that all these cryptozoology documentaries and books just leave out because it's inconvenient. Fred Beck, he doesn't come out and say that he was a theosophist or a spiritualist, but he certainly has sort of that tone in his writing. He had a lot of experiences with spirits of female spirits in his childhood. Things like apports were all through his life, including at the Ape Canyon site. He actually he was in need of a pencil and said that he had one materialize in his hand at the exact moment. He recognized it as a pencil from home. There's an encounter in that book, that pamphlet, of him meeting a sort of spirit girl, it seems, at Ape Canyon. There's also sounds of like underground machinery that happened throughout there. And
wow, I did not know all this.
Interestingly enough, the reason that they chose that site, the mine where the Ape Canyon incident unfolded, was he consulted his spirit guide, who sent a large white arrow flying through the sky that everyone else saw as well, that directed them to the site where they would have their gold mine. So wow. You don't hear about this in any of the traditional Bigfoot literature, because I think that those are some of those details that you referred to as being a little bit too inconvenient for some folks. And it's especially pronounced in that case because, they'll draw on Fred Beck's account for everything else regarding Ape Canyon. But when it comes to that stuff, they'll say, oh, maybe that stuff doesn't exist. Let's not talk about that in relationship to this. So yeah, it's really interesting. So I try to avoid that, although, I think that all of us sort of give into our implicit biases from time to time, even if we don't realize it. Right.
Well, for those who haven't, heard you before, why don't you explain a little bit about how you got involved in all this kind of research?
Certainly. Well, I grew up interested in all these topics. I came from a household that did not discourage me looking into them. The attitude was sort of like, hey, he's reading. I don't care if it's a book on ghosts reading, So yeah, I was always interested in sort of these topics. I think a lot of it too comes from the fact that I was a kid who loved monster movies and stuff like that. But
yeah,
always in the back of my mind, I was really, honestly, like really a cryptozoology kid more than anything else. I was into cryptids. I wasn't so much into ghosts because they seemed kind of mundane to me, which I know might be surprising, but like it was a very easy thing for me to believe in. And over the years, I had some not so dramatic stuff happened to me that suggested that that there might be something to ghosts. So I wasn't really as interested in ghosts because it was like, well, yeah, of course there are ghosts. But the Bigfoot stuff had always interested me. Came around to the UFO topic pretty late, actually. But over the years, probably back in 2012-ish, I really started listening to paranormal podcasts and podcasts on UFOs and such like that. And it really rekindled a lot of this interest in me, and was a great way to get me up to speed on a lot of the stuff that I'd missed out on. And, quite frankly, I've said this before, my first book, A Trojan Feast, was half because I thought I had stuff I wanted to say, and it was half because I just wanted to have conversations with the people that I was yelling at on my car stereo on the drive home.
I get that. Yeah.
It was just like, oh, I would love to have a conversation with these people. I need a reason to have a conversation with them. So, so I ended up jumping into the water. And as I think we've discussed before, it's better now. But even I would say, 10 years ago, it was still a little bit more difficult to come out and say that you're interested in these things publicly, or took them seriously publicly. I think it's gotten a lot better even since I've been involved. But yeah, so it was kind of like, it was a big sort of leap of faith, but it ended up, I try to put this in context with people, for people. Like, it's so weird to me that I grew up with, copies of books by Lauren Coleman and Patrick Weege on my shelf at home as a kid, and my first publisher was Patrick Weege, and so it was just like,
wow,
beyond my wildest dreams, actually, to actually have, another good example is Jerry Clark. I mean, I have I wish I had it over here so I could hold it up as a demonstration, but my mom back in middle school had to slap a bunch of clear packing tape over my copy of Jerome Clark's The Unexplained because I just read the cover off of it. And, now, and then, to wake up some 20 odd years later and have Jerome Clark reviewing my books in Fortean Times is like, what reality am I living in? It's really,
I know that feeling. I remember when John Mack actually quoted me in one of his books. I'm like,
wow.
I've made it. I'm in the big times now. So.
Yeah. I had a little bit of that recently. Jeff Kripal's latest book mentions me a couple of times, and it's like never would have thought. So I'm very grateful for how welcoming a lot of people in this community can be. I mean, I know people talk about certain communities having their infighting, and I guess they all do, but it's the segments of these communities, plural, that are welcoming are just some of my favorite people in the world, quite frankly.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Little MUFON groups all over the United States have been very kind to me, even though some people are like, MUFON.
Right. Well, I think when people like really integrate these experiences, they realize that no matter what sort of disagreements we might have, like we're all on a different side of this conversation than society has typically been, right? Again, things are changing. Things definitely seem like they're opening up, but like at the end of the day, we're all living in glass houses with our beliefs, so let's not throw rocks, and let's get together and get along with each other, I guess. Yeah.
Right. So your first book is very specific when it comes.
Yeah.
So when you started researching that, were you thinking, I'm going to write a book about this? Because you said, for me, I wanted to know about UFOs. So I started doing the research on it, not really thinking I was going to write a book on it.
Right. I for some reason, I can't tell you what my family had for dinner 3 nights ago, but I can remember some very specific things about some UFO cases and whatnot. I don't know why. So for whatever reason, there's a UFO shaped hole in my brain that a lot of this stuff plugs right into. So I was internalizing a lot of this stuff. And I was listening to podcasts by, Micah Hanks and Greg Bishop. And, I think that's a pretty deep end of the pool to jump into, I guess. So I feel like I was internalizing a lot of the stuff. Granted, I did learn on the fly, but for the longest time, I sort of sat with my idea for A Trojan Feast, which was this idea of this exchange of food and drink in all these sort of extraordinary encounters. and I kept waiting for somebody else to write a book. Like I was like, oh, it's been a couple of weeks. Nick Redfern is going to write a new book soon. Maybe he'll pick up this idea. But I got that sort of feeling. Maybe it was a call from the universe or something. But I remember almost like looking to my right and looking to my left and saying, is it me? Is it supposed to be me that's doing this? So I thought it would be interesting. It's funny that you asked that, because I've never really interrogated the motivation behind it, other than the fact that I wasn't very happy with my desk job that I had at the time. And I just felt like I had something to say, I guess.
Well, I know it's not for money or fame, because that's not what I...
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like I said to someone the other day, I don't write books to make money. I make a little bit of money off my books to justify writing, like that's the way it goes, to be like, it's okay that I'm spending this much time doing this because
it pays for the habit. That's about it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. It pays for the habit. So yeah, and honestly, there's a version of reality where A Trojan Feast came and went and wasn't as people weren't as kind about it, and I just kept on doing something else. But for whatever reason, it really seemed to strike a chord with people and resonate with people, and it sort of became something that I guess is, I don't think in these terms, but to use the parlance of corporate America, it kind of became my brand, I guess, is sort of looking at something that a lot of people tend to have overlooked or discarded over the years, or mentioned in passing, but never really followed up on and said, well, hold on. The Brimstone Deceit's a good example of this. People have said, oh, smells of sulfur, moving on, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait. like, let's dive in and see what we can learn from really engaging with this and diving deep and trying to pick it apart. Because, I don't feel like the world needs another book on Roswell or some of these cases that have been done to death.
There's 200 books on Roswell.
I would not doubt it. Is that true?
Yeah.
Is that true? Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't want to make that pile any higher. so yeah, that was sort of a logical step, was to look at this, these references to sulfur, because like, you see it a lot, and some people would spend a sentence on it, or some people might spend a paragraph on it, but they'd always say something about demons, and they'd always just sort of say sulfur in general and move on. And there are a couple of problems with that on its face. I mean, number one, maybe demons, but like, let's engage with the idea that it's something else, right? And then on top of that, sulfur, you can't really say that sulfur smells, because sulfur itself, the mineral, doesn't have a smell. It's even if you smell something in conjunction with sulfur, it's a result of off-gassing or some sort of combustion or something like that, and it's a different compound, and there are different sulfur compounds that you can smell. It's the difference between sulfur dioxide, which is that sort of fireworks or gunpowder smell, and hydrogen sulfide, which is the rotten egg smell. They're related, but they're not. They're very different, and they would suggest different things about the phenomenon if you really sort of looked at it. So that was like, aha, there's something that there hasn't been as much work done on. And so it sort of proceeded from there. And then you run into things, and then you get to 2022 and the topic of death, which is, I think, so big that no one wanted to touch it because I found so much to talk about.
Well, look at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Everyone completely freaked out when she was like the first person to say, "You know what? We die."
Right.
The stages of grief.
Well, that's the funny thing. I mean, it's sex, politics, death, religion, and UFOs. You don't talk about those around the dinner table, right? It's like those are the no-fly zones,
right? Or at parties, not unless you want to clear the room.
Yeah. So I guess my original mandate to sort of explore the smaller things has been tossed by the wayside to a certain degree. Although I really hope to. I've got a couple ideas in the future that I would really like to explore and go a little bit smaller with my scope. But yeah, so well, it's been a great ride. Mm-hmm.
Here's a question which maybe you can answer, because I've been curious about this. People are associating the smell of sulfur with demonic hauntings. And I'm looking through, there are some modern cases of, these really dark hauntings over graveyards and houses built over burial ground or something like this. And this turns up in a few of my own personal cases, certainly, of hauntings. But I'm wondering, when was how did this get associated with ghosts? Because it must go way back. And I'm trying to pinpoint,
Right.
when was the first time this became a thing?
Well, I don't recall the non-Western origins, and I think I went into those a little bit in Brimstone Deceit. But as far as like, in anywhere that's been touched by the Abrahamic traditions, anywhere that's been touched by those religions, it does seem to have a biblical origin, but people really do misread it. By which I mean, sulfur is has a long-standing reputation as a fumigant, right? It can help. To this day, we still use sulfur to clear up bacterial infections or acne or things like that. Like it's sort of a sanitizing element.
Like a sulfide drug, yeah.
Right. And if you look to references in the Bible, sometimes God's breath will be compared to cleansing sulfur, or cleansing brimstone. So the idea that Satan and his minions would smell like sulfur isn't because they stink because they're nasty and mean. They stink because they've been cast into the burning lake of fire. Like they stink because they're trying to be cleansed by divine powers. So we get a lot of that sort of backwards in that regard, which to me implies that no, the smell of sulfur wouldn't necessarily always be demonic, because you've got these clear connotations to it throughout the Old Testament of it coming from a divine source in that sort of role as a fumigant. So that's part of it. It is really interesting to me. Maybe I've mentioned this before, but I want to get this right. Hold on, let me bring up the PDF because I always find this stat so significant, so interesting. So we always talk about these phenomena want to remain hidden or not not be seen or not be noticed, or they want to erase memories and things like that, which I'm not saying they don't, but I'm saying that if UFOs and their occupants are as in control of things as they seem to be to me, sulfur is a bad choice to not be noticed. And the stat that I always use is our threshold for detecting hydrogen sulfide, which is the rotten egg smell. It's whenever you have the anaerobic decomposition of organic matter, it releases that smell, is 0.47 parts per billion. And
what does that mean in like layman's terms?
This is good. What it means in layman's terms is that,
Dolly, you're muted.
Is that one drop of ink in a semi-trailer tank is twice that concentration.
Right. The human body, our brains, we are genetically prepared through our olfactory nerve to detect that smell. And it's danger for us, because if you're detecting it in high amounts or any amount in your sensory perception, means get the hell away from it, because you're in trouble right now. That's why. And that's why it got thrown in with evil as well. Okay. Right. Because anything dead, dying, exposing, illness, whatever, are all associated with that smell. And that's why they've associated that way. And alchemy, way back when, who started playing around with the different compounds and everything, used that to scare the heck out of people. And then the church picked it up, and that's where the associations came in. Any religion, what kind of religion, it's all based in this is beautiful and this stinks and it's bad. And evil and good have taken on the identity of what we perceive as either good or evil. Take your pick.
Yeah. Our nose is sensitive enough to smell just a few molecules.
Yeah, I mean, and you're absolutely right, Dolly. I mean, I didn't realize this when I got into looking at the Brimstone Deceit, but there's an entire branch of philosophy dedicated to smell. Like there's smell philosophy that's out there.
That's exactly true. Yeah.
And there's a lot of there are a lot of things that
aromatherapy.
But even more to Dolly's point, there are a lot of just sort of sayings and colloquialisms that we use that point to smell being the ultimate arbiter of truth.
Right. Correct.
This doesn't pass the smell test. Something
Right.
smells
You're in
rotten.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's because smell seems to cut through. Our eyes can be deceived more easily than our noses can. Is the basic idea.
Right.
But to that extent, there's also a lot of work that's gone into the categorizing the hedonics of smell, like these are considered good smells or bad smells, and how the way smells change over time. And quite frankly, something that I think is a really powerful tool that I would not be surprised if these beings use in some capacity is the ability for smell to, I mean, it's almost like a form of telepathy, right? It's like a form of time traveling telepathy.
Thank you. You're hitting a button right there. You're
Yeah.
exactly correct, because your olfactory nerve is up in your brain pan through the roof of your mouth and your sinuses, and your brain gets smell faster than sight, hearing, touch, taste. Well, taste is right behind smell because it's all up in there together. But yeah, smell is a type of sensing, and if you talk to psychics, they will tell you that they will smell something before they know it's there.
That's interesting.
That's an incoming for most mediums.
It's deeply connected to memory. They know that.
Yes. Yeah. It can.
Yeah, and I mean, because you can't, like, the thing that strikes me about it is that is how rapidly and involuntary the memories come with smell. Like I might ask you to remember something and you'd be like, I don't, let me think about it. And you have to sort of visualize in your mind's eye. But if I present a very distinctive smell to you, like, it will put you right back in that moment.
Yeah. People with eidetic memories, and I'm one of them, have different, we dial up our memories differently, but smell is one of the number one places on the dial, because I associate either time, date, smell, music, and then touch for some reason. And if you bring a smell to me, I can go back anywhere in my past and bring what that smell is, because those are the things I pay attention to when I'm seeing things and I'm observing them. Smell is number one on the list, literally, for me. I can tell you what a hibiscus does or doesn't smell like when you crush the leaf of it, or the stamen of it. I mean, it's just weird.
I know I can smell barbecue from miles away. I'm like, that smells good.
And also recall it in your memory.
Which we're wired to do, obviously.
Smell memory is incredible. Yeah.
I mean, poo, to put it in non-offensive terms, smells real bad.
Yeah.
It's to stay away from it.
Yeah.
Well, and so I have some misgivings about the title of the Brimstone Deceit, because I can't tell you how difficult it is trying to come up with the name for a paranormal smell book. And it kind of sounds a little bit like, it should be in the Christian Science reading room or something, or that everything is the smell of sulfur, and that's not the case. It was a survey of all sorts of smell. Although
everybody's interest, what I enjoy about speaking with you and looking at what you've written. You're like a person a true researcher who goes through thesis, and you're bringing new information out that you somehow innately know or feel or haven't found to the surface. And the reason people go at first is because it's not something they've thought about. It's not something, it's like, is that tasty or not,
Right.
But then once they get the taste of it, they go for it. It's like knowledge. Once you taste knowledge and you want knowledge, you go for it. So I think that's awesome how you do this.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I do feel that sort of speaks to what ends up happening to me is somebody asked me recently, they were like, oh, I want to write a book about, they use the term the phenomenon. I want to write a book about the phenomenon, but I don't know where to begin because I don't feel like I have a novel idea. And I'm like, okay, here's what you do. You learn as much as you can about UFOs. You eat UFOs and drink UFOs and sleep UFOs and breathe UFOs. You take in it all. You're going to work. If you can, throw in a podcast. When you get home, read the book. Do that, and then stop. And then don't.
Mm-hmm.
And then look at something else that you enjoy. And at some point, and this has always been my case, at some point I will read something about, Indo-European horse sacrifice, or, the science of smell, or something from a completely different area. Mm-hmm. And it'll sort of tickle the back of my brain and be like, there's something here, there's something here. And that's really been my experience. But even more profoundly, the things that I've found that have really brought all of it together were never the suspicion that I came in with necessarily. It was really, a lot of them were just like library angel moments, anytime during the course of my research, I always make it a point. I have a list of books, and I go to this sort of changed during COVID for obvious reasons, but I went to the University of Georgia and walked the stacks and took pictures of the books that they had that were. But every time I would do that, there would be a book that wouldn't be the book I was looking for. It would be like 2 books over, and I'd be like, "Oh, this looks interesting," and I'd pull it out, and it would be like, "Oh, here's something that actually is a really interesting idea that always brought it together." And I kind of do feel, not that I'm saying, "Oh, my work is divine or something," but I do feel like there's some sort of hidden hand at play in those moments.
Yeah, your intuition is taking everything in. We're conscious, right?
Yeah.
And we hear everybody whether we realize it or not. And a book that's written has a signal to it. The words don't lay there dead, they're alive, because this person put everything they had into it. Even multiple printed books are still alive. And when you're looking for something and you put your hand forward for it or your mind forward for it, your intuition is picking up on things and pulling at it.
No, I completely agree. And my mind, my brain starts to break a little bit because I did a deep dive recently on some of the work of Eric Wargo and his time loop stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And that's something that I kind of have to keep in the back of my mind now. It's like, am I writing the book, or does the book already exist in the future and it's pulling me towards it?
Yeah. Well, it could be. Everything is already known. We're just experiencing it now,
Yeah.
Well, I have to say the Brimstone Deceit is an absolutely valuable contribution to the field, because
absolutely
every other book out there has duplicates of its research. Yours stands alone. It's the go-to book.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
I mean, it really is. I don't see anyone. People always put, let's redo the Titanic again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure they will.
It's already yeah.
You put that in there, and I think when there's a gap in the field of a certain area of knowledge, it's waiting to be filled.
Yes.
And this is what calls the book to a person.
Right. And especially this is part of what I want to get back to. I alluded getting back to some smaller ideas. What I like about these sort of smaller ideas is that it spotlights the lived experience of these things. So I have a tendency to sort of spiral off into these ideas about the imaginal and archetypes and all this stuff. But when you're smelling it, like it has a different sort of there's a different level of objectivity that's going on there, especially when you get multiple people smelling it or tasting it or something. So bringing it into that sort of like grounded, not allowing people the wiggle room to say, "Oh, well, it indeed might have been transcendental, but it was all in your head." Like being able to say, "No, I mean, like I got something from these things. Like they interacted with my physical senses," I think is important and something that always should be.
There's a lot of the Flatwoods, Virginia monster case. That was a smell that lingered for hours afterwards. And I was looking into a number of cases recently where it's not necessarily a foul smell, but a sweet smell.
And it's really frustrating because, again, with that sort of smell philosophy school, they talk about, they even have a term for this. They're like, it's called the tip of the nose phenomena. So like, when you have a word that you want to say it's on the tip of your tongue, a lot of times we just don't have the same linguistic capability for describing smells that we do everything else. We're so visual that we can describe a lot of things visually to a T, but like when it comes to smell, there'll be people will say like, "Oh, it was a chemical odor." And like, if you're writing a book on the stuff, you're like, okay, well, all odors are chemical odors. So like, what are you
really speaking? Yeah.
You compare it to something. So yeah, I mean, like I found a lot of allusions to, there's this sulfur thing, which breaks down these different compounds that I mentioned. And that's a rabbit hole that I don't feel like going into right now. But also, allusions to smells of ozone, smells of benzene, smells of a real common one that was I found, I believe, if memory serves, in conjunction with like crash reports, was the smell of Bakelite. If you're familiar with that material, that old material, which as I mean,
very specific.
I remember more of the 20th century than a lot of people I know, but like I still had to be like, Bakelite. What is Bakelite?
Yeah, you got to question where this person works, where they've grown up. You know, because it's perceptual memory that they're recalling a smell with, and if they
Right.
worked with Bakelite, they would absolutely know what that smells like, and if it's anywhere close to it, they're going to associate it. And
Lynn Stringfield had a case where the guy said it smelled like almonds and alfalfa, the ET.
I think that was that one's in the book, yeah. And I remember because I remember reading that, because it's like I have no frame of reference for. I mean, I don't think that almonds smell like much of anything, but yeah, I do remember that was in there. You've got Whitley's talking about old cheese and so like
cardboard. He said as well.
Yeah, cardboard and cinnamon. Yeah, that was another one. But yeah, sometimes you just run into these real vague answers, like chemical smells, or one that I noticed in conjunction with Bigfoot, because it also, a third of the book is spirits, a third of the book is UFOs and their occupants, and a third of the book is Bigfoot, because I felt like somebody needed to take a look at Bigfoot smells, because it's something you hear in all these Bigfoot stories. And one of the things that I completely forgot what I was saying. Anyway, no, I was talking about cinnamon, and we're talking about cinnamon and cardboard, and
no, you want to know something?
Yeah.
When you work with animals, you learn what they smell like, and sloths in particular have a smell to them, and it's because they don't bathe, they don't like water,
right,
and they have a type of bacteria and fungus growing on them all the time. Okay, and somebody I know who is an animal caretaker swore they came in contact with a Bigfoot, and I said, what did it smell like? Did it have a smell? And he said, yes. And I said, what did it smell like? And he said, a sloth. And I'm thinking about it. Yeah, he said, they smell like a sloth. They smell like there's something in their coat, and it's not them. It's an overcovering, like they're blending into everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. I like that description.
That's interesting. No, I remembered what I was going to say. Something that gave me a lot of heartburn in the Bigfoot section was people using the terms musk and must interchangeably, like musty and musky, and it's like, well, and of course, elephants, when they go into heat, go into must, and that's got a smell associated with it. So are they mentioning that, or are they talking about a musty attic, or are they meaning to say musk? And it was a bunch of difficulty there. But there's a lot of variation actually in the Bigfoot smells that I was able to find. Mostly it's bad, right? Almost exclusively it's bad, but like some of these explanations get really, really creative, like a tire filled with manure set on fire and stuff like that. It's like,
where their environment is. There are a lot of people, city people, who go out looking for Bigfoots, and they don't realize that the smells of nature don't even approximate anything that they live smell wise. Okay. And when you're talking to them, you say, all right, they'll start giving me chemical smells or things like that. And I'm thinking, where did you grow up? Oh, in New York,
Yeah.
In the streets, man. I'm a street kid. I'm like, okay, so you smell rotting garbage and sewers and things like that. And that's where their perception is literally locked into that. And they can't tell you what nature smells like because they don't spend any real time. It's a weekend warrior thing for them,
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay, so we have accounts of ETs smelling, ghosts smelling,
right,
cryptozoological creatures, all animals, of course. But what about fairies and little people?
Yeah, a couple of interesting ones. There was a tradition, I believe, in England of collecting little bits of like quartz, like piezoelectrical stones. And you would smash them together, and they would smell. They would call them boggart stones, after boggarts. And there was sort of an illusion that they sort of smelled sulfurous, although I don't quite buy that. There was also a very colorful description of, I can't remember off the top of my head the exact location. I believe it was in England, though, of a comparison to a group of fairies smelling like a bunch of people gathered in a church. Which in England, I'm sure, in like, the 16th century or something, I'm sure smelled quite pungent. But what's interesting is that the accompanying commentary to this particular account said something to the effect of, well, I believe that this person was trying to describe the smell of gases issuing from crevices in the earth. And I'm like, well, if that's true, that would be sulfur. But like, are you like trying to frame this within a demonic context for the purposes of the church framing fairies as demons or what. So, but yeah, there are some illusions that you'll find here and there as well. And, of course, the fairies are just they're so fluid in the way that they tend to appear to people. You've got those sort of folkloric fairies that were not necessarily always small and had a lot of these associations with the dead, and literally in folklore didn't have wings. Like, they had the powers of levitation, but they didn't have wings. But nowadays you get stories of people that I have no reason not to believe that encounter little tiny fairies that are lovely with wings, So it's like, how do you put those two things together? A good friend of mine, and the editor of some of my books, and I'm working on a project with her right now, Barbara Fisher. She had an encounter where she had some anomalous lights in her backyard, and she had just made a statement to the effect of what I just said for a group of people several days earlier about, like, well, the fairies aren't little winged pixies that are, floating around and all happy, like they're something that you don't want to mess with, and they're dark and they're folkloric. And she had a history of anomalous lights behind her home, and one of them drifted out of the woods one evening. And to make a very long and dramatic story short, it was an orb of light, and inside was a little winged woman. And she got this sort of impression in her mind, which was, we can look however we damn well please. And it's so. Yeah, who knows? If they can look however they please, maybe they can smell however they please. I don't know.
I kind of expected fairies to smell really good. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm going to admit something to you. I've actually seen a fairy once in my life.
Oh, that's amazing.
I was a teenager and had been horseback riding all day and got everybody put up. And we were tired and came home and, to the house. And I was walking in a field coming back around, and I saw something, and I was listening to music. I had my little Juliet radio, and I was listening. I like rock and roll, and I was listening to something, and it was quite involved, the song, and I'm humming along with it, and I'm walking, and all of a sudden I realized that I'm staring at something in front of me, and I can't quite make out what it is, okay? And I'm really staring at it now because it's not supposed to be there, okay? And I walked within 5 feet of it, and stared hard, thinking, what the hell? I thought it was a Barbie doll, okay, at first. And then it moved, and it stood up. It was sitting down on the ground, and it stood up, and it was a female, little 10-inch tall person, looked like, but she had wings. And I said, can you talk? And she shook her head yes at me. And I said, why are you here? What the hell? And she just said, you interest me. And I like your music. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And I'm looking at her because, like, she has something on, and I can't quite figure out where the hell she got that from. It looked like a bunch of different pieces of cloth that she put together, whatever. And the smell coming off her was like jasmine. Well, we had jasmine everywhere. And I think she rolled in it or something because she smelled like it. Okay.
Oh.
And I said, stay there. And I was going to run and go get something and offer her something to drink or eat. I thought, oh my God, what if she's hungry? I'm that kind of idiot. And when I turned around to go, I started running and I went, oh no, maybe. And I turned around to say, are you really going to wait for me? And she was gone. And I thought, dang nabbit. I haunted that spot for weeks looking for her again. Never saw her again.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What she said to you, it feels so characteristic of that sort of, because I see someone in the chat was talking about fairies sort of as being tough customers, and it's not so much that, it's just there's sort of a capricious contractual mindedness. It's sort of like I joke about with the mistake that occultists make when they summon a demon is they say, make me a ham sandwich, and poof, they turn into a ham sandwich. It's that sort of like literal, contractually minded, volatile, unpredictable, chaotic kind of thing. And that comment to you interest me is very much the sort of detachment that I would expect in that situation. That's fast. And then I like your music. I mean, there's a strong tradition, especially in Western Europe, of fairies and music and their love of music and how they would abduct fiddlers and harpists and stuff, just for the evening. And of course, they return the harpist home, and it would be generations would have passed or something like that. But
That's kind of interesting, because there's a sort of a tradition with Bigfoot in that as well. People playing big music to attract a Bigfoot. Music hath charm to soothe the savage breast or beast. What the
fuck? I've heard both those phrases. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's something to that, and I'm not sure in the cases of Bigfoot if it's it's just the idea of people having fun or relaxing or something. But there is a book to be written. I don't know if I'll ever get around to it, but there is a book to be written about music and the paranormal and how these things.
Well, you as a musician would be a good fit for that.
I know the only reason I haven't done it yet is because there are a couple of books that are out there that I've not read, and I'm like, well, I don't want to sort of retread familiar ground, so I'd have to read those first. But
I know Grant Cameron wrote a book about rock musicians, I think, who've had encounters. A lot of contactees have a big music background. I think ETs seem attracted to that in some way.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're right. And what I would love to do, and of course we don't have this, but it would be great to sort of do a Mario Pazzaglini style version of looking at ET music, because Mario was doing the alien writing stuff, and it would be nice to be able to analyze the music from a music theory standpoint. But I'm not aware of it. Let me put it this way: if either of you ever run into any alleged recordings of UFO music, let me know.
I know a few cases.
Okay, if they're recordings, I would love to hear them. Yeah,
they love classical music, by the way. They're enamored of it, all of it, from ages past forward.
No, I mean that makes perfect sense to me. And I mean, I look at something like Bach as being like sacred geometry in motion or something. Just the level of invention and consistency and recursiveness and intricacy is just, it really does boggle the mind if you really do a deep dive into it.
Right. Did you see those experiments where the guy played different types of music on a speaker with, I think, sand or salt or something on it, and made all these patterns?
Patterns up. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. There's something to learn from that. I'm not sure what. But
well, it's one of those things. It's one of those things, right? That you doesn't have anything to do with UFOs, but you're looking at it. It's like something in the back of your head is like tickling you, and you're like, this feels important, but I don't know what to do with it. Yeah.
All right. Well, we need to take a quick station ID break. So let me do that, and we'll get right back and maybe talk a little bit more about Ecology of Souls and some of the ideas in that book, it's so interesting and just really groundbreaking stuff. But let me just pop up the banner here. I want to let you all know that you are watching episode 73 of The Lightgate. I'm your host, Preston Dennett. My lovely co-host is Dolly Saffron. Our guest tonight is Joshua Cutchin. We're covering all kinds of different topics, from fairies and Bigfoot and odors and ghosts. And I mean, we're really going far and wide and deep and high with this subject because it is very expansive. That's what I love about Joshua's work. It embraces all these different facets to what's going on here. But we are streaming on several networks. I'm not sure if Rumble is actually working. I looked at it and it doesn't seem to be going onto my Rumble channel, but maybe next time we'll figure it out. But we are streaming live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 107.7 FM and 105.3 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana. We are also, of course, on YouTube. We are on Roku, if you have that, Roku TV. We are on Facebook. And one of these days we will get this Rumble figured out. This is our first attempt at it. But we'll figure it out. Huge shout out to Michelle DeRoche, The Outer Realm, and Amelia Pisano. Check out their show Wednesday, Thursday, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern. We love them very much. And now let's get back to our guest, Joshua Cutchin. So this book, Ecology of Souls, how did that start to come about? Because this is a big one. I think this is going to be one of the books you're really remembered for, because it is again unique and embraces these topics that a lot of people are just, I don't want to go there.
Yeah, I mean that's so that's part of it, right? I was in conversation with someone else. Maybe I'll tell you who it was later. But I always like to find things that I'm uncomfortable with and be like, okay, Josh, try to deal with this, try to integrate this, try to reconcile this, right? And one of those things that I always had an aversion to, and it wasn't really like ideological or religious or anything like that. I just didn't know what to do with it. We're like, these stories of pre-birth memories aboard craft and stuff. And, those, there is no shortage of those, and they aren't going anywhere. like that it's a thing. And I wanted to sort of force myself to take a look at that. But the other thing that I really wanted to sort of figure out, again, for myself, I don't want it, nobody has to join me in where I landed with this. It was there's another book in Ecology of Souls, if you read between the lines, which is me trying to figure out what this means to me, right?
Right.
But those three things really that always sort of stuck with me, which were the similarity of contact to near-death experiences and shamanic initiations. Shamanic initiations, which in some cultures are literally near-death experiences. The incidents of the dead seen either aboard craft or in heavy periods of UFO contact, which I mentioned last time, I think, and Dolly was like, no, it happens a lot. So I'm eager to hear how, because I found plenty of cases of that, but it might be more widespread than I thought. And then that really haunting quote from Anne Strieber, which was, this has something to do with what we call death. And I'm like, what's there that we haven't really looked at, and why haven't people really looked at it, in a dedicated way? Well, the reason they didn't look at it in a dedicated way is because it's a massive amount of material to try and get through. And I suppose if you're a curious idiot like myself, you end up sort of pulling in a lot of different directions. And that was probably the most surprising thing to me, was that just the idea of death itself seemed to manifest across areas of, if we want to say gloss broadly, the paranormal, that I had not really expected. So I'd expected to see it in the UFO thing because that was the purpose. And obviously it's in the near-death experience thing. Obviously it's going to be in the shamanism thing. It's all over fairy folklore, their connections to the dead in some cultures, especially in Western Europe prior to the rise of theosophy, but also cryptids and ley lines and ancient monuments. And like, I felt quite a bit like the person with the conspiracy cork board and the pieces of red string connecting all these things. But I just, the farther back I dialed in terms of perspective, the more I kept on seeing these similarities to death across all these different things. I think maybe last time we might have talked about lake monsters and their connection to death. We might have talked about that, yeah.
Which is probably why you had to do 2 volumes of it, right?
Yeah, well, that was the idea. I was like, oh, I'm going to write this book about UFOs and this connection, and then it became very apparent that if I wanted to be able to address some of these concepts, like polypsychism, the idea that there are multiple souls within us that you see across a lot of ancient cultures, even some contemporary indigenous cultures. Ideas like polypsychism, ideas like the wandering soul, all these different ideas. It's like, well, you kind of need to have either you're constantly going to be digressing to explain these things as you're talking about UFOs, or you can just write a book that sets it all up and then do the UFO book in part 2. So it's a bit of a misnomer because there's plenty of UFOs in part 1, but mostly part 1 is like, here's all the background, and then part 2 is like, here's the implications for the UFO question, and we can proceed accordingly, and I can reference things that you've already read because we've already covered them that sort of put this into focus.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ideas you explore in this book, and we mentioned a little bit about this in the green room. Now, but I'm curious, Ecology of Souls, it's an interesting title. So, do you have regrets about that one, like the Brimstone, or any second thoughts? Or, 'cause I actually like the title, and I'm very intrigued by it.
Well, so I've always about once a year I go back and I listen to a lecture by Terence McKenna, because he always meets me wherever I am at the moment, and I like to think that I'm always sort of thinking about new. I'm always trying to think in new ways about stuff, right? Because I don't want to become stuck in the way that I think about these things. And every time I listen to a Terrence McKenna lecture, something else speaks to me every time. And one of the things that had stuck with me was his shocking possibility that, when you take DMT, you have the shocking realization that perhaps you slipped into an ecology of souls. and that phrase just stuck with me. And what I really do like about that title is that what does an ecology imply? It implies that there are niches to be filled. It implies that we don't have this really reductive idea where everything has to be good or evil. Like there's a lot of room in between for things that are.
It also has to do with habitat.
Yeah.
Ecology has to do with habitat. And souls inhabit into a habitat where you're at now. You're in a habitat. Your soul is indwelling your body, and you're in this habitat. The ecology of souls is where are all the different places that they live, and the niches you describe are their zones of existence, and it can be dimensional as well. And one of the things that I find amazing to me is that the word death, is bandied about in that it has the wrong connotation of what we're really talking about, because we don't die. We're consciousness. We go to different habitats. We re-evolve. We rehabitate places. We're just shedding our skins to start anew somewhere else. That's the ecology of it. That's how we evolve.
Yeah,
okay?
there's this wonderful illusion that I found in some of the fairy folklore that I believe this was England, although it might have been the Scottish Highlands. But there was this belief that fairies would when fairies saw a human funeral, they would laugh, and when they saw a human birth, they would cry. And it's this implication that there's a revolving door,
it's kind of
between
profound,
this world
actually.
and that world. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely does speak to that, Dolly. So and I tell you what, I do have misgivings about, Preston, since you asked. I do have misgivings a little bit about the subtitle, because as my editor Barbara Fisher said to me, she said it's not really necessarily about death. It's about like death and birth and like the cycle of life, and it really is, because there's so much of that. There's so many. I mean, I'd alluded to pre-birth memories as there being no shortage of those, but like reincarnation and past life stories in the UFO domain is just there's tons of those. So yeah. There does seem to be something that is very fundamentally linked to who we are. That's part of this.
Yeah, well, I was looking into this book because it is interesting, and there's some really profound ideas that I think speak a lot to all of these different topics. And you mentioned Carl Jung and the collective unconsciousness, and the term imaginal versus imaginary.
Right.
When someone says imaginary, it's very like, it's not true.
Right.
And we're saying, well, UFOs occur in an imaginal realm. Like what?
Yeah.
What do you think of these terms? Are they useful, or are we going down the wrong track with them? Or
no, I think they're useful. I'm again, it's kind of really funny that you're asking me this, because I'm in the middle of writing a chapter for another project on imagination and what that is, and really what it comes down to is our treatment, or our mistreatment, I should say, of the imagination today is really an historical outlier. We have never really treated the imagination as frivolously as we do today. And I'm not saying that I can think about a giraffe outside my window right now and a giraffe manifests. I mean, obviously it could happen. It'll be hilarious if it did right now. But I'm not necessarily being that credulous about it. But I do think that there's a level of objectivity at play when we talk about the imagination that goes underappreciated. And stretching back into antiquity, both in the East and the West, there was a treatment of the imagination as having some sort of reality to it.
Yep.
To that extent, defining the imaginal versus the imaginary, I have been a big fan of Carl Jung and his treatment of archetypes. I think there's a lot of wisdom to be gleaned from that. Archetypes, the best description of archetypes that I found recently that I sort of uncovered from Jung was he compares them to dried up riverbeds that have been sort of eroded over centuries or millennia by humankind. And as soon as the water starts flowing, like that's the path that it will take. And the archetype itself is neither the land nor the water, but like something, the meaning of those things in between.
The mainframe. Yeah. There's a mainframe in all of us. We all have an archetype. We all do. It's in your DNA, and you're presenting it when you speak to people. And if you pay attention to the masses of people, you can start seeing that this person is very closely related in that their DNA is speaking the same language, and they're going to go along similar paths. They're going to have a lot in common with one another.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I often, one of my favorite descriptions of archetypes is that they're the source code of the universe, to use
exactly
a computing term. But the imaginal is a little bit different. And it's kind of funny that, again, it's really funny that we're talking about this tonight, because I just finally dove into I'm diving in a more serious way to the work of Henry Corbin, who was the one who coined the term imaginal, born in 1903, I believe, in Paris, a French philosopher and is a scholar of Islamic studies, who really wanted to explore some ideas, particularly from Persian and Sufi traditions, about there being this sort of imaginal world. But the interesting thing about Corbin is that he was very clear that this was not... it's funny, we were talking earlier about like sort of making excuses for these things and how smelling them or tasting things sort of brings them into the lived experience. That was very much what the imaginal was for Corbin. It was not something that could be sort of explained away as being a flight of fancy or something. It wasn't physical, but it wasn't mental, but it had an objectivity to it, right? Now, we could talk...
use our imagination to ferret through things we're trying to cognitively understand. In other words, I've had scientists who I go to lectures, and they say, imagine if you will. It's always the first statement out of their mouths, okay? Yeah. And they're asking you to use your imagination to use a focal point to what they're saying. In other words, quit thinking yourself and imagine this, okay? It's to drive you into something that they're trying to teach you or bring you to understand from their point of view, okay? And that's innately in us all, okay? Imaginal is part of our DNA. It's how we think. And I think a lot of people have been swung away from that. We have thousands of people nowadays that don't get that. It's not it's not a universe you can play in or play with. It's a universe where you use that ability to ferret the truth of what it really is.
Well, look at the root of the word, image.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you be without that?
I sometimes wonder if Dolly, to that extent, if that sort of suppression of the importance of the imagination and the imaginal isn't deliberate nowadays, But yes, so the way that I prefer to distinguish between imaginal and imaginary is that imaginary is in your head and imaginal's from your head, but not in your head, Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting distinction because, having had out-of-body experiences, if you imagine something when you're out of body, it does manifest. It absolutely will become an exterior reality.
Yeah.
Oh, we're sitting here talking about all these books that I've written and books that other people have written. I'm like, those started out as ideas in my head, everything around you started out as an idea, right? And so, and of course, we could get into the sort of philosophy of idealism if we wanted to make our brains hurt right now. But yeah, I think that there really is something to that. And anybody, I can think myself into a state of panic, into a state of arousal. I've thought myself into having psychosomatic symptoms that manifest in very tangible physical ailments before.
Yeah. Little kids are really good at that.
Yeah,
Their imaginations are off the dial. Yeah.
Well, the thing that always kills me is the way that the scientific establishment says, "Oh, that's just the placebo effect." It's like, wait a minute, do you hear what you're saying? The placebo effect is one of the most miraculous things in the world. It does imply that there's some sort of force that our minds can exert on the world, on ourselves.
Very good point, actually.
Yeah, it's just people sort of gloss over it. I'm like, no, that's an amazing thing. So, I think it's useful. I think it's a useful way to let different camps of ufology play well together. When you start talking about like the imaginal and stuff, the problem is when people get their wires crossed and they think that you're saying that people are making all this up, and it's like, no, like I think this is like, I think these things are, the imaginal is probably realer than we are in some sense, because they certainly are going to outlast us, all these images and archetypes and stuff.
No, that kind of makes me feel of, popping back into OBEs again, because you have an OBE, it seems more real than the physical world.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing I've noticed. I've heard that, obviously from you, but from tons of others. This realer than real quality is a phrase that just pops up time and time again.
This is a big part of the book. You mentioned in that book about the FREE study, headed by Ray Hernandez, where 80% of contactees have OBEs, and what was it? I wrote it down. 37% have near-death experiences. So there's a big bleed through here that's going on that, again, is overlooked by a lot of researchers.
Well, and I would love to hear y'all's opinions on this, but especially Dolly's as well. I tried trying to track down, I call it the chicken and the egg problem, right? Do people see UFOs and then have an NDE, or do they have an NDE and then they see UFOs? And I couldn't find any rhyme or reason to it. But what does seem to happen is that there's something about dissociation, and I don't know if it's necessarily trauma or it's sometimes induced by the phenomena, but something about the first time that you sort of separate your consciousness seems to be the hardest time. And then after that, everything seems to be a little bit easier. But I'd love to hear y'all's input on whether or not you think that's true or not.
Well, you live in a 3D reality, okay? Light is everything that we are. Every object that we have in front of us is all made of light particles, protons, okay? But we're gravity heavy here, and we can't see through that. Our brains aren't constructed to see the energy coming off unless you're using your psychic abilities, okay? That amplifies your sight, okay? When you're like this, this feels real to you. But what is really real is the light that you are. And when you OBE, you drop the physical and you go perfectly into the light. And that's where the real is, because consciousness is light. Your thoughts are light. We're all light. We're only communicating here through a physical medium. Okay. And it blinds us quite a bit to the nature of what reality really is and what it really looks like, feels like, tastes like, smells like here. Okay. That's what's going on. And one of the things that I learned from my ET compatriots is to try to teach people that and people have said this, you are more than the sum total of these parts. You exist outside of this frame. You're just sitting in this frame right now to experience this because you're learning this. Your perception is very narrow here. And when you release yourself from that and you go into light, then that's where everything expands and your consciousness sees all of it all at one time. And it is more intense than anything you've ever felt here, including pain. It is intense, that intense. When I had an NDE, I was about 5.5, 6. And the very first thing that struck me was that I was physical, somehow physical, but I was light too. Everything was light. I looked at myself, I could see the light that I was, but I had form, okay? And I was like, that drove me crazy at first. I thought, how can it be? How can I have form like, because you have your consciousness has an ethereal body, okay? And that body is the energy that makes you here, okay? You're contained within that ethereal body. And when you OBE, your consciousness lets go of that and goes there. But I had an NDE and I took the full experience with me. I took my ethereal body with me to the other side and I witnessed it. I saw it. And if you talk to NDEs, they will tell you I was solid as a rock. I could feel myself. I could do all of that. Yeah. But when I OBE, there is a definite, distinct difference. And that's where the dissociation comes from.
Okay.
Trying to make sense out of it. How can I be this and this and this? And it's mind-boggling. And once you do it a while, you get used to it, and then suddenly you go, "Okay, I get it. This is now back."
Yeah.
So,
I wonder. This is just a little bit of a tangent. Well, maybe kind of a big tangent. But at any rate, there are people who have negative NDEs,
right?
And this is,
yes,
is this, your own fault because of your own belief system?
Yes.
Whereas a person might have a negative UFO experience. And,
Right.
and a person will have a very positive NDE or a very positive UFO experience.
Well, and if you look at, what do the psychonauts always say? They say, set and setting are the things to be concerned about. Yeah. So I mean, I kind of wonder if there's not a parallel there too as well.
Yeah.
But how much of this is what we are scheduled for, and how much of this is reflective of something inside us? Like that's the real question. And
Well, you're a thinking person, and we all know when we're doing things in an inappropriate way. Okay.
yes.
And you take those feelings everywhere you go, because that's part of your consciousness. It knows you better than you do. Okay. Your physical mind is different from your consciousness. Your physical mind is totally encapsulated, and it only operates on its own. And without your consciousness speaking back and forth with it, you take those emotions with you, and you're really confused when you go to the other side. You can be confused when you go with ET as well. They suddenly wake up on board and they go, oh. Now, if their perception is I'm a bad person and this is bad for me, that's going to happen. Or I don't know what I'm doing, and then this is going to, it's like, what do you expect? And you can put that on yourself rapidly, how you perceive it all, learn that from nursing, because I've had patients in the ER, and they want nothing to do with me. They're terrified of me. They think I'm going to kill them or poison them or something like that. They think that no good is going to come of being there. They're terrified. And it's really hard to get through to that perception of theirs and cut through it and say, you're here because we care about you. They brought you here because you're in trouble, and all we want to do is help you get out of trouble. That's my first line to a patient in that situation. I do it on board as well. I tell people, you're not here because we abducted you. You're not here because we want to harm you. We're here because we're trying to help you. And if you want to talk to us about it, let's talk, and we'll give back and forth so that you understand. A lot of people don't remember it because they're so afraid their brain goes boop, their hippocampus can't take it, and it's almost like catatonia. Bling, they're gone,
Well, consciousness does play a huge role. And
Yes.
they used to think, from a materialist point of view, that the brain was the vessel of consciousness, until they started finding patients who were missing quite a bit of their brain, or most of it, and were still fully functioning.
Yeah.
No problem.
So what is going on here?
Yep. Yeah.
The brain is not the mind.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to the idea of the brain as a receiver of consciousness nowadays. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and something else that you had mentioned earlier, Dolly, I don't want it to quite go by without snagging it and commenting on it. I really like that mention of the sort of physicality of these experiences, and I think that's where I think it's a huge stumbling block for people that we don't address enough, right? They think that there's like this clear dividing line between physical and psychic, or physical and non-physical, or I don't think it works that way. I really don't think it works that way. It doesn't seem to work that way.
You're correct.
Because you do get people who have dream injuries, and you do get people who have stigmata, and to say nothing of the bigger question of UFOs, but also, ghosts slam doors and can also walk through doors. So it's like we shouldn't have these things in opposition. We really
no, exactly.
A good hypnotist can burn someone with an ice cube. They will blister.
Right. Again, something that.
So what's going on there?
Yeah. Again, it's something that like a lot of the reductionists out there will be like, oh, well, that's just the power of the mind, and you're like, wait, hold on a minute, hold on a minute. Or even, what we're told so often that, the one, as when we're scorned by skeptics, that we shouldn't explain one unknown with another unknown. And yet, you'll have a skeptic hear someone's extraordinary experience and go, oh, it was their imagination. And I'm like, well, you just explained an unknown with an unknown, because we don't really know what the imagination is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Frustrating.
No, perception is everything. Everything.
I want to pop up a question from chat, because it's a simply deceptive question. Deceptively simple, I should say. Where Carl Mids is asking, okay, UFOs, what are they? From my perspective,
right,
they're ET craft. But if you were to ask Carl Jung, he calls it a modern myth of things seen in the sky. So are we looking at an archetype that is dependent on our own beliefs? Or can they be all things? I know what Dolly's going to say.
Right.
Not all UFOs are craft. Not all UFOs are balloons. Not all UFOs are U.S. government made. Not all UFOs are
They're different
correct
things.
in your perception. They could be other things. There's a lot of things that a UFO could be. You have to literally become your own researcher and your own detective. When you see something in the sky, don't believe, because that's stinking thinking. A belief is not a fact. A belief cannot be proven one way or the other. Okay. You have to take on hard facts and decipher for yourself. What is this? What am I looking at? What time is it? Look up star maps. What's going on right now? Call your local airport and say, have you guys seen anything? They'll answer you. Look for anything that it could be, and don't tell yourself what it is until you're bloody sure. And if it's an unknown to you, leave it alone. Just catalog it. Okay, I saw this. Maybe I'll see something like it again, and I can go from that point forward. In other words, you start collecting clues with this, and you'll eventually come to a cognitive decision on whether that was a craft or a balloon or a sky anomaly or back engineered. Airplanes look like UFOs in the sky at certain times of the day because the sun's glinting off them and they look funky. There's 1,000 things it could be. UFO it just means unidentified, flying phenomena,
ET craft. That's what I think most of them are.
Well, but I do like what you said, Dolly, about like, look at, the UFO category is probably a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. There's misidentifications in there. There's natural phenomena that we don't understand in there. There's hoaxes in there. There's deception in there, and then there are genuine anomalies. There are things that could be
experience.
Right. Well, there are things that could be ET craft, and they could be some sort of soul phenomena, and they could be, like Eric Wallett's mass poltergeist events. I think that there's a lot of things that we see in the skies. I have been, I have been playing with a lot of ideas lately that if I can embody an archetype, as we've alluded to earlier, then I think that you can make Stan Friedman and Carl Jung play rather well together. There's a way for that to happen, where these things can, we've seen the story of contact between distant civilizations play out enough times on Earth that it is an archetypal story in and of itself. So I think that they can be archetypes and be something a little bit more nutsy boltsy than I normally think that they do. Now, is that my personal evaluation, having had not as many experiences? Not necessarily, but I think that we are too quick, just as we are with the physical non-physical thing, to start putting things in camps and sort of dividing it all up.
Yeah.
Well, I did interview one guy who's had fairly standard UFO experiences. And I say standard, I mean, taken on board and seeing grays and being examined, but has had everything in terms of ghosts and weird odors. He once had this light coming down the street towards him. All the traffic disappeared. It was a crowded street. And this light comes right in front of him, and out comes this beautiful woman with this solid blue emerald background that looked like an ocean. It wasn't your typical ET. And it completely made him shift his belief system as to what was happening to him. And he honestly feels, Preston, I think it's more along the lines of what we would call a jinn, a genie, which leads to that whole idea that you explore a little bit of the self-negating trickster, which kind of takes the evidence along with it.
Right. I am a big fan of George P. Hansen's The Trickster and the Paranormal. I think that's a very useful book. It's a difficult book to get through, but I think it's a very good book. And there does seem to be something. There seem to be aspects of this trickster archetype all over all these different phenomena.
It's definitely in shamanism.
A con will use anything to con you. And one of the things that is horrifying to me is that we're not using our abilities to the point that we can see the truth right in front of us, because your abilities are smarter than your physical mind. And you can tell when you're looking at something what you're looking at, and you can actually question it in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you weren't using your abilities. It's like shining a light on an object so you can see every part of it, all of it at one time, And that's why we need to pay attention to the fact that we are consciousness, that we do have abilities, that we are transmitting and receiving signal, and it is important that if you're going to blame it on something you don't understand, then you're hurting yourself because you're not seeing it for what it really is. And that's hard,
Right. I would say that the idea of the trickster is not necessarily always negative. A lot of times in a lot of different sort of expressions of it throughout different folklore, it's about being subversive to attain a positive end sometimes, or about being sort of a holy prankster in some ways. It's a lot of times it's about this idea of transgressing boundaries and turning expectations on their head, and
Exactly.
really fostering a level of
this.
Forcing you to think outside of the new box, consider new paradigms, explore new ideas. And we see this with the high strangeness aspects of UFO encounters. When they do stuff, you're like, what's going on here? How do you explain this?
And I just see such a razor's edge between humor and dangerous or reckless mischief. You know what I mean? Like, there's such a razor's edge between those two things. And it might indeed sort of come down to what we were talking about, whether it falls into humor or it falls into danger is sort of what we bring to the experience too. But there's that sort of trickster element to it, and people have sort of drawn comparisons. You had alluded to the jinn, but the jinn are also more or less comparable. There's a case to be made that the jinn are comparable to being Middle Eastern fairies in terms of some of the lore that's around them. There are even stories of jinn changelings and time dilation around jinn and all these sort of things that we see with the fairy stuff too. So I don't always know of what to make with it. I have some new ideas that I've been playing with in terms of what the trickster might signify, but I'll sit on those for a little bit longer until I'm ready.
I'll tell you what.
You gotta let the soup simmer until it's done.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
One of the things that I've considered about this archetype is that some people learn the hard way, okay? And they're adrenaline junkies on top of it, and they have huge egos. And one way to learn, good or bad or indifferent, is to use that principle and go after everything that you're trying to accumulate or do. And it could be for good or stupidity, or it could, it's just their personality, their archetype. It is an archetype. And these people, if you take a step back from it and you look at it, most people wonder when you're looking at these archetypes is, when are they going to wake up and just stop doing that, because they're wasting valuable time in their existence here to keep doing this. It's a lot of energy going into tomfoolery, okay? And it's not helping them. It's hindering their education. They think they're being educated by it, but they're not. That's self-delusion. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's something that I've learned with my exposure in terms of the recovery community and stuff. Yeah. It's that that rock bottom is, I don't mean the people who are successful in their substance abuse recovery wouldn't trade their rock bottom for a dadgum thing,
Right.
And it's really what you do with those experiences in a lot of cases. I'm not saying that there isn't a objective tragedy, and I'm not saying that there isn't stuff that is a clear-cut case of, no, this is bad, but I'm saying that a lot of the stuff that we, especially when it's brought on by ourselves, there's a lot of stuff that we just sort of be like, oh, this is the worst thing ever, but it's or it's a really great opportunity to learn and to actually change, because by and large people don't change. It takes something dramatic to make them change.
Yeah.
True.
All right, how about bringing another deceptively simple question in?
Oh no. Those are the scariest.
Which is really only 3 words, Ratford. Question: what is time? And I just want to preface this by saying, here we have UFO encounters where people are taken on board and will experience 2, 3, 4 hours, come back, no time has passed. Same with near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences. I know you have fairy cases that you can cite, which people are come back 10 years later or something. And I'm wondering, does this turn up in cryptozoology at all? people say a UFO comes around and they're walking in slow motion. Time is playing into all of these paranormal experiences in weird ways we don't fully understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's and I honestly, there's a point in Ecology of Souls where I'm like, I haven't touched on time. I don't know what to do. I don't know like, this book's long enough. I don't want to talk about time. But yeah, you alluded to there sort of being a pause where this entire experience happens and they come back and it's the same time. I had somebody recently send me an account of gained time as opposed to missing time. But yeah, the fairy stuff, the fairy stuff is really dramatic. I mean, sometimes it is that sort of like, oh, I went there for a year and I came back and it was only a day in our world. But the most common variation that you see is like, oh, I went there for a day and I came back sometimes generations later. The town is completely different, and like you sit down to have dinner with your great grandchildren and the first time you take some food, you crumble to dust. But I have found it. It doesn't get talked about a lot for some of the similar reasons I think that people don't talk about the strangeness with Ape Canyon. But there are examples of missing time, especially in Bigfoot reports, that you see from time to time.
Really?
Where and the reason it's not like, if you're talking to a ufologist and somebody makes the comment, oh, I thought it was only 5 minutes, but actually 40 minutes had passed, the ufologist will go, aha, they'll recognize it for what it is. But the instances of missing time that I found in Bigfoot cases, and I could list some examples if you wanted to, that same sort of comment will be made, like, oh, I thought maybe it was half an hour that we were being circled by these things, but when we got back down from the mountain, it was 4 hours later. The things that you'll hear from the cryptozoologists are things like, oh, well, when you're under stress, your time seems to really speed up like that. I'm like, that's number one. That's not what scientific lab studies have shown your sense of time does in stress. Like, time tends to slow down in stress.
Time doesn't dilate; it slows down.
Exactly. And number two, like, that's an anomaly that should be addressed, but it's just not on the cryptozoologist's radar like it is for the ufologist. So it sort of just gets shuffled off to the side. But I have seen it surprisingly often. Yeah, surprisingly often. But as far as what time is, I don't know.
Time is our perception of a sequence of events. It's different on the other side, I can tell you that. It's hard to describe, but you can actually peer into the past and certainly into the future. So yeah, I think our idea of time is still a work in progress.
You understand? Look up what it means to be in dimensional space, okay? Because if you see the first dimension, it's a flat line, right? And the gravity is so heavy that everything is just a flat line. Second dimension, the gravity changes a little bit, and you have up and bottom, okay? Third dimension, we see 3 dimensions, and we can perceive the fourth. We understand that there's a fourth dimension with us because we're moving within the space. And that's where our understanding of what that fourth dimension is. It has less gravity. Fifth dimension has even less gravity than this. Time, how your brain can dilate or slow time down, depending on the emotion that you're in or what state of mind you're in. It's the same thing with dimensional space. Time in the third dimension is absolute. You have a line, and our brains only tick off 1 second at a time. Okay. That's what time is. You're literally counting the seconds, minutes, and days of your existence while you're here. But outside this dimension, time collapses. There is no time.
Right.
Okay. That's what time is.
It's dependent on perception, because I know when I'm at work at the job I hated, time would actually stop. It would not go. When you're having fun and doing all kinds of things, it whizzes right by.
Yeah.
So it's got perception and engagement involved there.
But it's another one of those things that, like, we just take for granted. Like, culturally, we take for granted, or or we're told we should just believe, like, well, that happened in the past. Okay, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Yeah.
All you got is right now. Every second we're speaking is the second that we're in, and a lot of people don't understand that you have to be fully invested in what you're living right now. You can remember the past. That's what the past is. And you can conceive of the future, but right now you're still right here. Seconds.
Right. It's the every win all at once. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you also talk about the archetype of animals in the book, whether it's hellhounds or, like in near-death experiences, people might have a boat or a horse. Or,
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
It's pretty wild because there are certain animals that, you can't really say that anything is universal, but like you can get kind of close to it. And, there are certain animals that do seem to show up with regularity in very similar roles in cultures that are extremely far removed. And if there ever were animals that you could consider, universally one thing or the other, birds and horses and dogs are almost universally regarded as psychopomps. These characters that lead people's souls to the other side. This might be because they all sort of embody things that you'd want from a soul guide to the other side. Your horse is loyal and going to lead you places that you can't go, and birds can go places that human beings can't go, and dogs are loyal companions. And I guess if you're Inuit, have been used as forms of transportation as well. But yeah, you see this sort of thing time and time again, popping up in these sort of funereal contexts. You'll find dog burials, you'll find associations of dogs and death in Mesoamerican grave goods where dogs or dog effigies were buried alongside the dead, and then in the literal Egyptian psychopomp Anubis, like the jackal. So there's something to these ideas that seems very universal and does, I think, sort of touch on this idea of there being something to this idea of a collective unconscious or these archetypes that we're dealing with.
Yeah, well, I know there's some families that say, whenever a black dog appears, this means someone in their family is going to die.
Yeah, I mean that's the sort of tradition that the Hound of the Baskervilles was based on, where some of these old Black Shuck or Barguest or Padfoot, like throughout the British Isles and in Ireland and Scotland, they have all these different names for these large black dogs. But again, associated with death, also sometimes called fairy dogs. And there are some, let's just say, some suspicious dogs that pop up in some of these UFO experiencer reports. I'm reminded of Alan Godfrey's dog that he saw during his abduction.
They're almost never poodles or chihuahuas, though.
Right? Yeah,
they're just not.
Yeah, no, they're not. They're not. Or corgis. That would be great. UFO corgis. But yeah, and then so there's that connection there, and then you start looking at the birds that I alluded to, and owls are just such a potent symbol, and we all know what the work that Mike's done with that.
Mike Cleland, yeah.
And have a strong association with fairies as well. In certain parts of Brittany, it was said that I think, if memory serves, there were some terms that were interchangeable between fairies and birds. In the Dominican Republic, actually, they have a type of owl known as the Stygian owl. Stygian after the river Styx, so we've got our death symbols here. But they're one of their folk names is Siguapa, which is also a Dominican Republic name for some of their little people that they have. Siguapa is the same name. So there are all these little sort of connections that you see, and it's just like, what are the odds of this being so consistent around the world? And then UFOs and horses. Poor Snippy the horse. I don't know what else to say.
Very interesting. So what are you working on with your next book, or can you give us any preview?
No, I can talk about it a little bit. It's been quite a challenge. I alluded to earlier how there are certain things that I see and I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. So I guess I should engage with it, right? Because it kind of makes me uncomfortable. Right now I'm dealing with those stories that you hear about fictional characters coming to life, which is, again, with my trademark agnostic,
or the Hat Man.
Well, right. Or there's a famous example, the famous example that people know that I think is just one of the most interesting ones, although I've found tons of these, and it's part of this is just an excuse for me to find these stories. is the story of Alan Moore, a comic book writer who was sitting in a sandwich shop, and he saw his character John Constantine walk through the door after having created John, and like they exchanged a look, and he went about his way. Yeah, so like there have been a lot of ways that people have thought of these things. They've thought of thought forms and tulpas, and the co-creation hypotheses and stuff. But I found examples that pop up throughout the UFO reports and cryptozoology reports and some ghost stuff too. So I'm really trying to examine that and explore that from a lot of different angles that haven't been tackled before. So it's driving me a little bit mad. It's leading me into,
I know the feeling. Yeah.
it's leading me into some places that are some of the as difficult as parts of Ecology of Souls were to sort of wrap my head around. It was nothing compared to panpsychism and idealism and non-dual aspect monism or dual aspect monism and like stuff like that. The field of narratology, the study of what makes a narrative is filled with like formulae and such. So I might have bitten off more than I can chew this time, but I'm a little bit over halfway through with it. So hopefully I'll have that finished by the end of the year, knock on wood, and we can get that out, and everybody can see what a true kook I really am. But I hear these stories. I mean, there are some people very close to me who have shared these stories with me, and with their permission, they're going to be sharing them for the first time. But it's again, I just feel like I have to do something with these stories, not in terms of like I have to preserve them or this or that, although I'm always about preserving stories, but it's like people are reporting this, and some of these people, at least some of these people, are as earnest as people who report stuff that are very sort of run-of-the-mill Bigfoot stories or run-of-the-mill UFO stories. Like people who are just as earnest were like, I don't know what to tell you, but like I saw, an extra from the Broadway show Cats walk across my driveway one night. Like I don't know what to do with it. So
well, just imagine because if there's no one else talking about these sort of things, who's going to come forward and say that this happened to me?
Well, that's the other thing is that there's just there's such a stigma around this, and it makes the UFO question look like not a taboo at all. And there's a lot of people who have sort of played with this in the past, and it's sort of
Clifford Simak, my favorite science fiction writer, based a whole book on this exact idea that all awesome. The literary characters came to life.
That's awesome.
Started wandering around all over.
Yeah, and and the thing that I think is going to be tricky for some people to wrap their heads around is like I'm just presenting these to you with an open hand, and I'm not saying that it's true. I'm just saying that the stories exist. So pick and choose as you will. But it's interesting. It's interesting. Let's put it that way.
I'm particularly fascinated by stories that you can't categorize, and that are absolutely like, what do you call this?
Yeah.
How do you explain? I was looking at one that they put in a UFO magazine. It doesn't really belong there because this lady was driving along. She knew exactly where she was. Her kids were in the car, saw the gas station. Next thing they knew, they were out of town again, going back into it. There was no UFO.
I love it.
They call it a time slip.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
It's like a space slip, though, almost more than a time slip. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but
yeah, I mean, well, and also like I'm always been a real fan of like the one-off sort of entities that people encounter. There's an example there's an example that I love to talk about. That's from the coastline of Peru. I believe this was back during the year of the humanoids, but sometime in the 70s. And there's this guy who's just driving along the coast, and he sees a flying saucer hovering above the sand dunes. So he gets out and he goes over to it, and it's like these three entities who are described as kind of looking like conjoined bananas, and they have like one monopod foot, and they're covered in like skin that looks like a beige beach towel, and their heads are made of jelly with like a nodule inside. And it's like,
Dolly, you're muted. You're muted, Dolly. Dolly, you're muted.
Who's muting me?
Not me.
The human mind is an unbelievable object, and it is capable of almost anything, okay, consciously or unconsciously. And one of the things that I learned the hard way, I've studied this in psychology, but then I lived it. When my kidneys failed, my GFR was 8. That's seriously bad. Okay. I'm poisonous to myself. And my brain was not operating fully. And I had no sleep. I couldn't sleep. I was so sick from this. I went days with no sleep. I had to get to Georgia from Florida. And my friend followed me. So because she was terrified because I refused to not bring my car home on my own. We stopped somewhere and I couldn't really eat because I knew better. Okay. But I had to stop. Okay. And we stopped and she got something to eat and I got something to drink and I ate a couple of French fries while I was sitting there. And when I was sitting there across 2 tables away from me, I saw Augie Dog sitting at the table looking at me. And I'm like, oh crap, now I'm seeing things. Okay. Yeah. And then I saw Quick Straw Metra, and then I saw Yogi Bear. And they followed me to the car. And they sat in the back seat in the car all the way back to Georgia. I'd look in the mirror every now and then, and they're back there. And I don't know what the hell to do with this. When I got home, I was seeing them parade across my vision. I'm not kidding you. I learned very rapidly that we can be in altered states. And one of them is waking dreaming while we're fully conscious. Mm-hmm. And whatever's in your brain pan, you're going to project out like a movie to yourself.
That was the first explanation for ghosts, historically speaking. They thought these are waking dreams.
Right. So when you're talking to people and you're asking them, I learned that ask them every question you can think of that surrounds that situation, because you're going to find out that either it's something weird that the brain is projecting to them, back at them. That's a waking vision. Okay. Mm-hmm. People do use those words to describe these things. And I think it's us doing it to ourselves. Okay. It's not paranormal at all. I think it's all involved in our own brain pans and we're projecting things to ourselves. Waking, dreaming, literally.
In a way, all things are paranormal and nothing is, you know what I mean?
The idea is to understand that's what happening to you. When I realized that, I begged somebody, give me something, knock me out. I need to sleep because I'm in trouble. Well, I had to get a catheter put in my chest for dialysis right away. That's the cat. I told you. And then, once my situation got me cleared of all the toxins and everything, and I got some sleep, they were gone. You know, and I was like, oh, phew. But I understood what it was and I put it in its right place in my head. You know, I understood that I was doing that and that I'm not crazy. This isn't paranormal. I'm doing it. Right. See what I'm saying? A lot of things that our physical minds are capable of doing seem paranormal and they are not. It's a natural phenomenon to the human body and the mind.
I still have questions about why it manifested that way for you, though. Like, you see what I'm saying?
Because I didn't watch horror movies. I didn't watch. I was a kid who kept away from everything. I had ET contact all the time. Right. That was enough reality for me. Okay. Right. The only thing I ever really watched, because my brother watched them, was cartoons. Right. And that's where my movies came from. That's
at least it wasn't clowns. That would have been.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We have time for one more question, and I want to apply it to all aspects of not just ETs. Peter Doubt is saying, why won't aliens just show themselves? Just say squid. Why not Bigfoot? Why don't they just show themselves? Why don't fairies just come out and show themselves? You know, what are your opinions on that, Joshua? Kitty, it's okay.
My opinions of that are probably of the same reason that you don't start a joke with the punchline, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? like it's the experience is baked into why it exists, right? You know, there's a progression that has to happen. Or you know, give a person a fish / teach a person to fish, right? You know, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah,
I think we're autonomous beings, and we have enough problems dealing with ourselves. And ET is autonomous as well, and they don't believe in interfering with us. That we need to learn our own lessons. We create our own problems. We have to fix them. Mm-hmm. And for them to interject their reality onto everybody all at once is a very bad idea, because we'll instantly go to, why don't you fix us? That's not how this works.
Yeah,
we have to fix ourselves. You know,
it's true.
Do fairies ever put on displays for like crowds of people, or is it usually an individual experience?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes, they have. I can't provide any examples, but I know if I looked, I could find them.
Fair
So,
enough.
I mean, nothing on the scale of like Fatima or anything, if that's what you're wondering. But yeah, I mean, there have been groups of multiple fairy eyewitnesses. Yeah, that's a thing.
All right. Well, we're getting to the point where we have to close out the show. But it sure has been awesome. Ecology of Souls, guys, check it out. Is there anything more you want to say about this book, or?
Oh no,
Or anything else?
I'll see everybody when I come up for air at the end of the year. Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Cool. But, yeah, JoshuaCutchin.com. Find me there, or I've got some other stuff that I'm working on that we'll see. It'll happen when it happens, I guess. But
Are any of your books on Audible?
I'm trying a sort of pilot version of my my novel.
Okay.
That is going to be on an audiobook. The biggest problem with doing Ecology of Souls on audiobook is that there are a lot of words that I can't quite figure out how to pronounce. A lot of older, like very sort of esoteric terms and whatnot. So that's part of it, and then the other part of it is I don't want to be the person to record it myself, and that's also a significant financial investment. But we'll see. I'm working on it because it needs to happen. I get that question all the time. So yeah.
Okay.
Very cool. Well, thanks for joining us. Definitely, when you get your next book out, drop us a line. We want to get you back.
Yes.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll do.
Yeah, and we might book you before that if it takes
Yes.
too long. So.
All right.
But yeah.
Sounds good.
Thanks
Definitely.
so much. And for those who are listening, remember these Joshua's links are in the show notes. And I also want to give a shout out to all you guys who've made such wonderful comments and engaged with us in chat. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions. I tried to get to at least a few of them. Thank you all for the amazing super chats and the really nice comments.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated. And thank you definitely for joining us.
Okay. Are we ready?
I think so.
Thank you all. Thank you, Joshua, for coming. I love it when you show up. And when we sign off, we're going to book you again.
All right.
Dates.
All right.
Okay. All right. Love you, everyone. Thank you for coming to visit us on this Monday night. And we hope you have a wonderful week. And until next Monday.
Wait, don't forget the call signs.
I'm going to do that next.
Oh, okay.
Namaste. So we are coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in the state of Louisiana, from the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We are on Roku, Facebook, and YouTube. And I want you to have a spectacular week. Bye.